So good morning to one and all. So today's topic for discussion is the descending tracts, which is also called as motor or the efferent tracts. Now we have to understand here the concept of the descending tracts. Before going into the details of this tract, we have to understand the concept of these descending tracts. Now in the previous lectures, you have studied the ascending tracts. So what is the role of the ascending tracts? So they bring the information from the periphery, and this information reaches the higher level in the central nervous system. And once this information reaches higher level, then the information is processed at the higher level. And the central nervous system, it makes some decision. And the central nervous system makes some decision and sends this information down. Now these neurons which bring this information to the lower level in the central nervous system, either from cortex or subcortical areas through the bundle of axons. So these axons, they are called as the descending tracts. Now these descending tracts, they produce some motor response. Now this motor response will be in the form of, that is, movement of the contraction of the group of muscles, which will lead to the movement of that part of the body. Or through the autonomic nervous system, the descending tracts, they also produces responses like modifying the activity of the gland, heart, or smooth muscles of the GIT, etc. It means the descending tracts, they are concerned with bringing motor decisions from higher level of the central nervous system to the lower level of the central nervous system. And these descending tracts then eventually produce the motor responses through the skeletal muscle, that is voluntary motor responses, or from the ANS, the responses which are produced are the modifying the activity of the gland, smooth muscles, or heart. Now today we are going to discuss about those descending tracts which produce motor responses to this in the skeletal muscle. Also we are going to see which higher centers are involved in these motor responses, and eventually how they are sending this information down at the lower level of the central nervous system. So everybody has followed what are the descending tracts. So these are bringing, that is, motor decisions from the higher level of the central nervous system to the lower level of the central nervous system, and then produce the motor responses, mainly that is the voluntary motor responses. So in the descending tracts, the major or the important, one of the important tract is the pyramidal tract, which is called as the corticospinal tract. Why the name pyramidal? Because it is arising from the pyramidal cells, which are located in the fifth layer of the cerebral cortex. If you have studied the histology of the cerebral cortex, you know that in the fifth layer, there are these pyramidal cells from which this tract is originating. So it is labeled as the pyramidal tract or the corticospinal tract. Why corticospinal tract? It is beginning from the cerebral cortex and terminating in the spinal cord. Now, apart from these pyramidal tracts, there are certain other descending tracts which are labeled as extrapyramidal tracts. So they are in addition to the pyramidal tracts, hence they are labeled as the extrapyramidal tracts. Specific learning objectives of the today's session are: the student should be able to enumerate the descending tracts, describe the origin, course, termination, collaterals of the pyramidal tract, and then describe the functions of the pyramidal tract. So these are the specific learning objectives of the today's topic. Now this major, that is descending tract, is the pyramidal or the corticospinal tract. It is further subdivided into lateral corticospinal tract, or it is also called as crossed pyramidal tract. Why it is called as lateral corticospinal tract? Because if you see its position in the spinal cord, it is occupying the position that is in the lateral white column of the spinal cord. Why it is called as cross pyramidal tract? Because in the lower part of the medulla, 85% of these fibers of this pyramidal tract, they are crossing to the opposite side, that is contralateral side, and hence it is labeled as the cross pyramidal tract. In addition, there are 15 to 20% of the fibers which do not cross to the opposite side. So these now remaining fibers of the pyramidal tract, they are labeled as the anterior corticospinal tract, and they occupy the anterior white column in the spinal cord. And these are also called as uncrossed pyramidal tract. Now let us see What are the extrapyramidal tracts? So in these extrapyramidal tracts, we are going to study rubrospinal tract. So this is what you say, in addition to the lateral corticospinal tract, whatever the role is played by the lateral corticospinal tract, same action is what you say done by this rubrospinal tract. So it is addition to this lateral corticospinal tract. It also brings about the flexion. It also stimulates the flexor group of muscles. So it arises from the red nucleus, which is situated in the midbrain. Then comes the tectospinal and the tectobulbar tracts. So these are taking origin from the tectum of the brainstem. So that is on the dorsal aspect of the midbrain, you will come across superior colliculus or the inferior collicular. Yeah. So these are called as the tectum. So from these tracts are arising, and some of them are reaching the spinal cord and some are terminating in the brainstem. So these are labeled as tectospinal and the tectobulbar tracts. Then you will also come across reticulospinal tract, which arises from the reticular nuclei which are scattered in the brainstem. Further, these are subdivided into pontine or the medullary reticulospinal tract. Mainly, they are terminating on the gamma motor neurons of the spinal cord. We'll study in detail afterwards. Then comes the vestibulospinal tract, which is also ending on the alpha motor neurons of the spinal cord. Then comes the medial longitudinal fasciculus, where you will find the decussation of the various, that is, motor nuclei of the cranial nerve. Then comes the olivospinal tract, so which originates from the inferior olivar nucleus, which is situated in the medulla. So these are the what you say list, that is the list of the extrapyramidal tract. So today we will be concentrating only on the corticospinal tract. We will be concentrating on the corticospinal tract or the pyramidal tract, and few of these fibers from the corticospinal tract, they will be terminating in the brainstem, which will be labeled as the corticobulbar tract. Now, if you see the length of this tract, it is extending from the motor cortex to the last segment of the spinal cord. So it is considered as the longest tract. It is considered as the longest tract. Now, this tract is present only in the higher vertebrates and man, where the cerebrum has developed. So we are superior to the other animals. We are superior to the other animals. The composition of this tract. Now this tract is present on either side of the spinal cord. So it is bilateral, and each tract consists of about 1 million nerve fibers. Out of that, 60% are myelinated and 40% are unmyelinated. Even though 60% fibers are myelinated, these are of small diameter, so the tract is slow conducting. Now let us see from where this tract begins. So it is from the motor cortex. So the motor cortex, it is concerned with the generation of the voluntary motor activity. Now for that, come to the superolateral. You can see in the given diagram the superolateral surface of the cerebral cortex, and there you can see the most important landmark, that is the central sulcus of the Rolando. Here you can see the central sulcus of the Rolando, and in front of this central sulcus lies the motor cortex, and behind the central sulcus lies the sensory cortex, which is concerned with the sensory activity. So in front of this central sulcus lies the motor cortex, where there will be generation of the voluntary motor activity. Now, how do you know that the area which lies in front of the central sulcus is motor cortex? So the scientists, they have learned this by electrical stimulation of that particular area with microelectrodes. So they found that on stimulation of the temporal area, the person starts hearing. Occipital area stimulation, the person starts seeing images. If the sensory area or the sensory cortex is stimulated, it gives awareness of different types of sensations. Now, other way of study is by causing destruction of that area, and usually it is done in the lower animals to see what function is lost and what neurological deficit is produced by destruction of that particular area. So with different experiments, the scientists, they came to know that the area in front of the central sulcus is the motor area, which on stimulation, it produces the movement of a part of a body. So when you stimulate at a particular area in front of this central sulcus, you'll find that it will produce a movement of that particular part of the body. Now, this motor cortex, again, it is further divided into three major areas of the motor cortex. So there is what you say multiple multiple systems are controlling this motor system. Now here you can see now the central sulcus. In front of the central sulcus, you'll find now in front of the central sulcus, you'll and which also extends on the medial aspect. That is this area, this region is called as the precentral gyrus. Precentral gyrus, and this is what we call as the primary motor cortex. We label it as the primary motor cortex. Now there is one scientist named that is Brodmann. So he gave numbers to all the functional areas on the cerebral cortex. So according to him, this primary motor cortex is the area number 4. So this primary motor cortex, it contributes to about 30% of the fibers of the that is the pyramidal tract. So 30% of the fibers, they are coming from this primary motor cortex, that is area number 4. That is the what you say, their primary motor cortex, it is contributing to about 30% for this pyramidal tract. Now just in front of this precentral gyrus or the primary motor cortex is one more area, and that is called as the precentral area, or it is called as the premotor cortex, that is area number 6, right? So here you will come across, this is premotor area, that is area number 6. And in the upper part, now just in front of that, you come across one area, that is area number 8. It is called as the frontal eye field. Now this frontal eye field, where you have come across, you have seen that in the accommodation reflex, frontal eye field. Okay. So this premotor cortex, that is area number 6, area number 8, they also contribute to about 30% of the fibers. In addition, you will find, now this is the prefrontal area, that is area number 6. Premotor cortex. In the upper part now, in the upper part, this area, it is called as the supplementary motor area. This is called as the supplementary motor area, right? So just in front of the precentral gyrus, this area, it is called as the premotor area, and in the upper part, it is called as the supplementary motor area. Okay, so this premotor area and the supplementary motor area, and this, that is the area number 8, that is frontal eye field, they contribute to about 30% of the fibers. So you'll find now these three areas, that is primary motor cortex, prefrontal area, and the supplementary motor area, all of them, all the three of them, they initiate the motor activity or the movement. But we have to understand how they differ, how they are differing from each other in their activity. So their activity differs from each other. Now, if you consider the primary motor cortex, it is concerned with generation of the voluntary motor activity. It is concerned with generation of the voluntary motor activity. That means it will bring about, or it will bring about the execution of that movement. It will bring about the that is the contraction of those muscles which are required for that movement. So that execution of the movement is the function of the primary motor cortex. Now come to the area in front, that is called as the premotor area. Now whenever the thought comes, suppose now a thought comes to our mind that I want to pick a pen from the table, or I want to drink a cup of coffee which is kept on the table. Now when this thought process is generated in our mind, this thought process or this idea is immediately transferred to this premotor area. And now this premotor area plans the motor activity. So it generates the motor program. It will generate the motor program so that the movement can occur. Now for that, it needs certain inputs. So what are the inputs required for this premotor area? It requires information about what is the initial position of that part of the body where the movement is going to occur. It means it requires all the proprioceptive information from that part of the body. Now for that, it will consult with the cerebellum and the sensory area. Now you know that all the proprioceptive impulses, they are reaching the cerebellum via the spinocerebellar tract. So there are two spinocerebellar tracts we have studied, posterior spinocerebellar tract or the dorsal spinocerebellar tract and the anterior or the ventral spinocerebellar tract. And through this, the proprioceptive information is going to the cerebellum and it occurs at the unconscious level. We are not aware of that proprioceptive sensation. So this premotor area consults with the cerebellum regarding that. So now you have studied now the functions of the spinocerebellar tract. What is the function of the posterior spinocerebellar tract? So it will give information regarding the, what is a position of the limb as a whole. So it will determine the position of the limb as a whole and its relation with that of the body and its relation with the different parts of the body. So that information is carried by the posterior spinocerebellar and reaches the cerebellum. Similarly, the ventral or the anterior spinocerebellar tract, it will give now that is information regarding that individual muscle. How much, that is what is the muscle tension there, how much is the force of contraction, what is the degree of contraction at that time or in that initial position of that part of the body. So all this information is reaching cerebellum. So the cerebellum, it is keeping that motor image of our body. So this information is by consulting the premotor area, the cerebellum, it gives this information to the premotor area. Now the same information is also reaching to the cerebrum and it is reaching to the cerebrum. How? That is through the ascending tracts, that is mainly the dorsal column tract. Through that, the same sensory information is reaching to the sensory cortex. So the premotor area now also consults with the sensory area, and now from both of them, that is cerebellum and the sensory area, it now comes to know what is the initial position of that part of the body where the movement is required. Followed? And then from this information, it will determine what should be the final position of that part of the body. So what will be the final position of that part of the body after movement? And then accordingly, it will compute the difference and it will determine what should be the suitable program. So it plans the suitable program for that movement to occur. Now this final program will be executed through the descending paths, that is the descending tracts by the primary motor cortex. So this final program, once it is developed, then it will be executed through the descending path by the primary motor cortex. So this primary motor cortex, it gives commands or orders to different pathways, which muscle should be activated, with which speed and degree of contraction, so that the movement can be executed. And this information is coming down through the descending tracts. Now during making any movement, some background posture is posture and tone in other muscles is also required for the proper execution of that movement. For example, when you are writing, you are moving only fingers and hand, but the tension at the elbow and shoulder joint has to be changed to stabilize the hand. So the background adjustments, these are made by the supplementary motor area, which is situated just above the premotor area. So here you'll find that to bring about that movement, multiple systems are needed. Now there is a difference between the action of the premotor area and the supplementary motor area. Premotor area, it plans the fine movements of the distal muscles of the hand. So it will plan the fine movements of the distal muscles of the hand. So fine and precise movements. So that are planned by the premotor area. One more example, that when you talk, that speech movements. So all these advanced movements, they are planned by the premotor area. But supplementary motor area, you will find that it is concerned with the primitive movements. So it is also doing motor program, but it plans for the trunk or the primitive movements. And these are usual bilateral, right? So you'll find that 30% contribution is coming from primary motor cortex, 30% contribution is coming from premotor area number 8 and the supplementary motor area. Now there is one more area which lies behind the central. Now this is the central sulcus. Behind that you can see now one more area which is called as the post central gyrus. and that is forming, that is the primary somatosensory cortex, and that you have studied in the ascending tracts. So final destination for all the sensations, sensation modalities, they will terminate in this postcentral gyrus. So you'll find that this primary somatosensory cortex, that is labeled as S1, in the lower part you will come across, deep in the lateral sulcus, you will come across the secondary somatosensory cortex, that is S2. So what is the number for the primary somatosensory cortex? It is area number 312, like that. And for this now, since that is secondary somatosensory cortex, it is, that is, you will find that this gyrus, it is labeled as the supramarginal gyrus, so area number 40, right? So they are contributing also in the formation of the descending tracts. In addition, you will find there are, now behind this, what you say, primary somatosensory cortex, you will find the parietal lobe association areas. These are also contributing to this descending tracts. So you'll find that if you consider the sensory cortex total, 40% contribution is coming from the sensory cortex. So this is how the fibers of the pyramidal tract, they are taking origin. Right? Now come back again to the primary motor cortex. Now come back to the first point, that when a thought comes to our mind, when a thought comes to our mind to do any movement, for example, picking up the pen from the table or having a cup of coffee kept on the table, that thought idea is generated in the prefrontal cortex. So here you will find this is now the region, you'll study detail afterwards. So this is very important site of intelligence. It decides the personality of the person. So here now that thought process, or it is what you say, the thinking process is going to occur here. So that idea or that thought process is generated here, and from here it is reaching to this primary motor cortex, prefrontal area, supplementary motor area, and these signals will be going from this prefrontal cortex to these three areas. So these three areas will be stimulated to send the signals down through the descending tracts. But before that, before the cerebral cortex sends these signals down, the cerebral cortex should be sure that the movement which is going to occur, it should be smooth, it should be perfect, and it should be executed properly, or perfectly, it should be executed properly. So for this, there is a special checking mechanism, and this is situated in the subcortical region, that is deep to the cerebral cortex. You'll find in the white matter there are certain neuronal groups which are called as the basal ganglia or the basal nuclei. So these basal nuclei, they act as the checking mechanism. So all these three motor areas, they will send the information to these basal nuclei which are situated deep to the cerebral cortex. And this basal nuclei will be informed that from these three areas, that what motor movements they want to perform. So what motor movements they want to perform, this information goes to basal ganglia. Now the basal ganglia, it will work over it and sends a blueprint of that movement back to the cerebral cortex. So it will send a blueprint of that movement back to the cerebral cortex, and which tells the cerebral cortex to fix or to correct certain things before sending these signals down. So these corrections are in the form of prevention of the overshooting. What do you understand by overshooting? Undershooting means if you are going to pick any object, whatever the movement is going to occur, it will be restricted up to that object only. But suppose now some damage or dysfunction is there, then these movements will be, now that while picking up that object, that movement will be extended beyond that object. So the hand will move beyond that object. That is called as the overshooting. And what is undershooting means that movement will stop before you reach to that object. So that is called as the undershooting. So such corrections are given in the blueprint by this that is the basal ganglia, and these corrections are made by the cerebral cortex. Now one more checking mechanism is present below the cerebrum, and that is called as the cerebellum, which lies on the dorsal aspect of the brainstem. And this cerebellum also communicates with the cerebrum, and the cerebrum, it sends this information to the cerebellum that this is the planned motor movement we want to do. So it will send also the information to the cerebellum that this is the planned motor movement program we want to do. Now cerebellum, as I told you, from the posterior spinocerebellar tract, the cerebellum, it is receiving the information from the proprioceptors through the spinocerebellar tracts. and which will give the information regarding the position of the muscles, tendons of the different parts of the body. So now the cerebellum, it compares that incoming information with the intended movement planned. So it will compare the initial position and then the final position, that is the intended movement which is planned, and then sends back the final blueprint to the cerebrum, and then it will send the final blueprint to the cerebrum. And now we have that perfectly planned motor movement. So now we have perfectly planned motor movement. So the motor areas, the three motor areas, that is the primary motor cortex, prefrontal area, supplementary motor area, they have coordinated the information with the basal ganglia and the cerebellum. And so the final pathway, which is now to be sent down through the descending tracts, is now completely checked, and it is perfectly executed movement. Follow? So this is regarding the origin of this pyramidal tract. So for understanding better, I have explained the functional aspect of these areas so that you'll understand it better. Clear? So this is now the origin of the pyramidal tract from these various areas. Now the fibers which are descending down, in that the most impressive fibers, they are coming from the giant pyramidal cells. Now you have come across, now you have studied the histology of the cerebral cortex, which is having six layers. Now the pyramidal cells, they are located in the fifth layers. And again in this pyramidal layer, some of the pyramidal cells, cell bodies, they are larger, right? And those are called as the giant pyramidal cells, or they are called as the base cell. So if you see the number, out of the total fibers, these base cells, they contribute only 3% of the total fibers. So that accounts to about 34,000 fibers on each side. Now, what is the peculiarity of these axons which are arising from these giant pyramidal cells? So these axons, they are myelinated, and they are heavily, heavily myelinated. That is, they are of larger diameter, and so these fibers are, fast conducting. So these fibers are fast conducting, and remaining 97% of the fibers, you'll find that these are of small diameter. These are of small diameter, and they conduct background tonic signals to the motor areas of the cord. Just now I have told you the role of the supplementary motor area. So background that is tone adjustment has to be done in the other postural muscles. So for that, the signals are coming, they are conducted through this remaining fibers. So background tonic signals are provided to the motor areas of the spinal cord. These remaining fibers, they will send feedback signals. Now these feedback signals will be coming from the cortex, and they are given to the incoming sensory signals. They are given to the incoming sensory signals to control their intensity. Means these feedback signals, they are given in the form of the muscle tension, force of contraction, degree of movement, which is needed for that final planned movement. So that information is given to this incoming sensory signals. And so accordingly, the changes will be made when these sensory signals will reach to the higher level. Accordingly, the changes will be made at the higher level, that is in the cerebellum and also in the cerebrum, right? So that is the role of the other 97% of the fibers, providing that is background tonic signals and providing feedback signals to the incoming sensory signals. Follow? So these are now the fibers which are descending down. Now come to the course of this, course of this pyramidal tract. Here you will find now these neurons from the different areas of the cerebral cortex, that is wide areas of the cerebral cortex. The neurons, they send their axons down, and you'll find that these axons, while they are descending down, they are appearing as if they are radiating from the cerebral cortex. They are radiating from the cerebral cortex, so they appear fan shaped. So these descending axons which are fan shaped, they are labeled as the corona radiata. So this fan shaped white matter which is arising from the cerebral cortex, it is labeled as the corona radiata. Now further you will find that now these radiating fibers, as they descend down, they become compactly arranged. You can see here, they become compactly arranged. They come close together. These fibers are condensed and compactly arranged in a V-shaped white matter. V-shaped white matter, it is a special structure of the white matter which is called as the internal capsule. Now this internal capsule, you'll find it is having V shape, right? So this is now the anterior limb, this is the genu, and this is the posterior limb of the internal capsule, right? So now you'll find that these descending fibers, they come down and they occupy the position in the posterior limb of the internal capsule, right? So you'll find that in these descending fibers, there are some fibers which are going to terminate in the brainstem. So these fibers, they are called as the corticobulbar fibers. So these corticobulbar fibers, they occupy the position of the genu, right? So that is the junction between anterior limb and the posterior limb of the internal capsule. So here lies the genu. So here lies the, that is the corticobulbar fibers. And in the anterior 2/3 of the posterior limb lies the remaining, that is the corticospinal fibers. So here you'll find they are densely packed. And this structure, that is internal capsule, is clinically very important structure in chronic hypertension. In chronic hypertension, sometimes the blood supply of this area is cut off due to rupture of a small blood vessel, or it is blocked by thrombosis. Because of that, you'll find that the large number of fibers now, these are condensely packed, compactly packed, which are going down to the different parts of the body. So they will be now damaged because of the blood supply which is cut off. And now these fibers, they are responsible for the voluntary movements in different parts of the body. So these fibers will be damaged, and this will result into cerebrovascular accident, CVA, what we call, that is the cerebrovascular accident. And the person that patient lands in the hemiplegia, paraplegia. So that we will study in the applied aspect. So this portion or this internal capsule region is very, very important clinically. So here why? Because all these fibers, pyramidal tract fibers, they are condensely or compactly arranged. So a small, small damage in this area will be reflected in large part of the body. Now next, now you'll find further, now when it is passing through this internal capsule, you'll find that on lateral aspect of this internal capsule in the subcortical region, you can see here, now this is now the part of the basal ganglia which is called as the lentiform nucleus. It is called as the lentiform nucleus. Now on the medial aspect, you can see now the thalamus, and here now in between, that is the anterior limb of the internal capsule, it is lined, that is laterally by that lentiform nucleus and medially by that caudate nucleus. Again, that is one of the component of the basal ganglia. Clear? So this basal ganglia, we have seen what is the role of that. So it sends that blueprint to this, cerebral cortex for the correction. So here you will find this location of the basal ganglia. Now further, these fibers of the pyramidal tract, they will descend down into the brainstem. Now they will descend down to the brainstem via the arm-like structure which is called as the cerebral peduncle. Clear? So this, by this cerebral peduncle, this pyramidal fibers, now they reach the brainstem. Now the uppermost part of the brainstem, this is called as the midbrain. Middle portion is the pons and the lower portion is the medulla. So here you'll find it reaches to the ventral aspect of the brain, that is the midbrain. And here you'll find that this part of the cerebral peduncle, here mainly it will occupy the middle 3/5 position. 3/5 position of this cerebral peduncle, or what is called as the crus cerebri. So these fibers, it will descend down and occupy the middle position in this cerebral peduncle or the crus cerebri. Clear? Now you'll find that further, now it will descend down into the pons. It will descend down in the pons. Now you'll find that in the pons, now the fibers get scattered into different bundles of the axons. And this is because of the pontine. You'll find this is because of the pontine nuclei which are present in the pons. Now these pontine nuclei, they keep the update of the incoming information from the cerebral cortex, and then it sends this information. It will send this information to the opposite side of the cerebellum via, that is the connection. It is called as the middle cerebellar peduncle. So you'll find that the brainstem is connected with the cerebellum by 3 arm-like structures which are called as the superior cerebellar peduncle, by which the midbrain is connected to the cerebellum, middle cerebellar peduncle by which the pons is connected to the cerebellum, and inferior cerebral peduncle by which the medulla is connected to the cerebellum. Clear? So it is not seen in the diagram, but you just imagine that. So here now in the pons you will find the pontine nuclei. So they keep that information which is coming from the cerebral cortex, and the same information is transferred to the contralateral side cerebellum. Why contralateral side cerebellum? Because when you will trace this pyramidal tract downwards, you will find that in the medulla, major of this part of these fibers, they cross to the opposite side. So the right, the right, so now what you see, that is the right sided pyramidal tract in the medulla, it will cross to the opposite side and it will go on the left side. So here the pontine nuclei, they are providing this information to the contralateral cerebellar hemisphere. Means the right pontine nuclei, it will provide this information to the left cerebellar hemisphere. So if you compare the left cerebellar hemisphere, it is having ipsilateral control, that same sided control over the body. So finally, the left cerebral cortex and the left cerebellar that is hemisphere, both of them will work in coordination. So they will control the same side of the body. So that's why the information from the pontine nuclei, it is going to reach to the contralateral cerebellar cortex or the cerebellar hemisphere. Okay. So now what we have to here remember is that because of this pontine nuclei and the transversely running fibers of the middle cerebellar peduncle, this tract, pyramidal tract, is scattered in several bundles, which is called as the longitudinal fasciculi. Clear? So here there will be formation of the longitudinal fasciculi. Now further you will find that again now these fibers in the medulla, they reunite to form a bulging on the ventral aspect of the upper part of the medulla, and this bulging is labeled as the pyramid. So in the specimen you can see that on the ventral aspect of the medulla you will find that bulging, and this bulging is nothing but the pyramidal tracts which have now this come down and reunited. So from the scattered form now they are here reunited. That occurs in the upper part of the medulla, and that bulging, it is called as the pyramid. Now next you will find in the lower part. Now in the lower part of the medulla, you will find out of that total fibers which are present on the one side of the pyramidal tract, out of that 80%, 80 to 85% of the fibers, they cross to the opposite side. So you can see here they cross to the opposite side, and now they occupy the lateral white column of the spinal cord. So in the diagram you will find that they are occupying the lateral white column of the spinal cord, and hence these fibers now which have crossed to the opposite side, now they are forming a separate tract which is called as the lateral corticospinal tract. They are called as the lateral corticospinal tract. Clear? So here you can see now the crossing of the fibers from either side. So 80 to 85% of the fibers, they are crossing here, and now while crossing they are decussing here. So this is called as the pyramidal decussation. This is called as the pyramidal decussation. Now the remaining 15 to 20% of the fibers, now they are uncrossed fibers. So they will descend down in the spinal cord and they will occupy the position that is in the anterior white column of the spinal cord, and hence they are labeled as the anterior corticospinal tract. So they are labeled as the anterior corticospinal tract. So now the pyramidal tract, further now it is subdivided into cross pyramidal, that is the lateral corticospinal tract, and the uncrossed pyramidal, that is the anterior corticospinal tract. Now, while these fibers are descending down, you'll find that at the level of the midbrain, few of the fibers from this descending tract, they are terminating on the motor nuclei of the cranial nerves, that is third and the fourth cranial nerve motor nuclei. So these are nothing but the corticobulbar fibers. Similarly, in the pons also, the corticobulbar fibers, they will be terminating on the motor nuclei of the 5th, 6th, 7th and the 8th cranial nerve. And in the medulla now, the corticobulbar fibers, they will be now terminating on the motor nuclei of the 9th, 10th, 11th and the 12th, cranial nerves. Now, you'll find that the role of these corticobulbar fibers is that they are sending signals to the muscles of the face, larynx, pharynx, upper jaw, lower jaw. So they are controlling the voluntary movements of that region, head and neck region. Clear? So that is regarding the corticobulbar tract also. Now in this diagram, you can see now the wide areas of the cerebral cortex, they are giving origin to the pyramidal tract. You can see now the axons, and you can see the shape of this axon. So it appears as if radiating from this internal capsule. So it is appearing fan shape, which is called as the corona radiata. Now again, they are compactly arranged in the internal capsule. If further you'll find in the brain stem, you'll find that few fibers, they are terminating in the various, that is the motor nuclei of the cranial nerves. So these fibers, they are the corticobulbar fibers. Remaining fibers, they are descending down now as that is the corticospinal tract, and at the level of the, you'll find lower part of the medulla, there occurs the decussation of the pyramidal, that is 80 to 80% fibers decussate, and they cross to the opposite side, forming, that is the lateral corticospinal tract, and the uncrossed fibers, they will form here, that is the anterior corticospinal tract. Now, if you see in the spinal cord, now you can see here, this is the anterior horn cell. Now, you'll find that this lateral corticospinal tract, it will descend down in the lateral white column of the spinal cord, and afterwards, at each level of the spinal segment, you'll find that each level of the spinal segment, few fibers, they will turn medially, and they will terminate in that, motor neurons of the spinal cord, that is alpha motor neurons. Majority, they are going to terminate on the alpha motor neurons of the spinal cord. Few also will be terminating on the gamma motor neuron, right? So they will turn inside and they will terminate here. Now the uncrossed fibers, now you'll find they descend down, they extend up to the mid thoracic level only, and finally again they will cross to the opposite side. So again you'll find the anterior corticospinal fibers, they are again going to cross to the opposite side. Now again in this diagram, you can see now the single fiber, you can see the course of this at the various level, that is in the brain stem, then how it crosses to the opposite side in the lower part of the medulla. And here you can see how it is terminating on the anterior horn cells. So at each level, few fibers, they are turning in from that lateral corticospinal tract, and they are ending on the anterior horn cells. And from this anterior horn cells will arise the ventral root of the spinal nerve, which will provide the efferent signals to that specific group of muscles, and that there will be contraction of that specific group of muscles, which will lead to the movement in that part of the body. And because of that movement, you will find that whatever that work is there, so voluntary movement, so that picking up the pen or picking up the coffee mug, like that, so that work will be done. Now let us come to the inputs of the motor cortex. Inputs of the motor cortex. So now this motor cortex, it receives inputs from the somatosensory, that is primary sensory cortex, also from the visual and the auditory cortex. So you'll find that these areas, they send signals to the cerebral cortex, and whatever the signals or whatever the sensations they are received from the visual auditory cortex and the from the various parts of the body, that is from the eye, then from the ear, and from the various parts of the body, the sensory information, it is reaching to the cerebral cortex. And here now in the cerebral cortex, you'll find the sensory information is processed, and then the decision is taken, and then this processed information is sent down to the lower level of the spinal cord, that is in the anterior horn cells, or either in the motor nuclei of the cranial nerves. So the inputs, they are coming from these parts. Then again inputs, they are coming from the motor cortex of the opposite side. So you'll find that the motor cortex of the opposite side, it also sends information to this cerebral cortex, which is going to produce that particular movement. So that the supportive movements from the other part of the cerebral cortex, that is other side of the body, is that information is given to that motor cortex. So both the motor cortex, they will work together. So when one of our hand is working, the other hand is knowing that what work is going on the one side. So that is for that the two cerebral cortex, they are working together. So if the right hand is working, the left hand is knowing what the right hand is doing. So automatically it will try to support the movement. So suppose we are picking up any object, and it falls. So immediately you'll find the opposite side hand comes to help the right hand. So that is the that is the motor cortex on either side, they are working in coordination. Then also the input is coming from the thalamic sensory nuclei. So you are in the ascending tracts, you have come across the ventroposterolateral and the ventroposteromedial, that is nuclei. So via this nuclei, the sensory information, that is proprioceptive information, is coming from the ascending tracts and it is reaching to this, what you say, sensory, it is reaching to the motor cortex. Again, you will find that information from the basal ganglia and the cerebellum, it is passing through the thalamus. So we have seen the function of the basal ganglia and the cerebellum. They act as the checking center. So they will monitor the motor action or whatever the movement is being executed by the primary cortex. So they send the blueprint to the cerebral cortex by sending these signals. So that the movement, so that the signals which will be going down for that producing that movement will be smooth, perfect, and it will be also executed perfectly. And this occurs from that dentatothalamic tract. So in the cerebellum, you will come across one nucleus, that is dentate nucleus. So that cerebellum is sending information via thalamus to the cerebral cortex. That proprioceptive information is going to the premotor area for the voluntary functions. Then also the input is there from the intralaminar nuclei. Now these intralaminar nuclei are present in the thalamus. So we'll study it in detail later. But remember that this intralaminar nuclei, they are sending, receiving impulses from the reticular activating system, which is concerned with the awakeness of our cerebral cortex. So these intralaminar nuclei, they receive the impulses from the reticular activating system and then send this to wide areas of the cerebral cortex. And these impulses, they are responsible for the what you say, diffuse alerting effect on the cerebral cortex. So cerebral cortex is kept alert by this intralaminar nuclei, which is sending signals from the reticular activating system. So these are the main inputs of the motor cortex. Now let us come to the course. You can see here, you can draw this flow chart also. So from the cerebral cortex, the fibers will be descending in the subcortical areas where it forms the fan-shaped structure, that is corona radiata. Then it will travel through the internal capsule, that is the spatial white matter in the spinal cord. So here you will find now, this is V-shaped structure, that is the internal capsule. So here the corticobulbar fibers will occupy the genu, and the remaining corticospinal fibers, they will be occupying the anterior two-thirds of the posterior limb. Further now, they will reach to the midbrain. They will reach to the midbrain, and in the midbrain, you will find they will occupy the middle portion of the crus cerebri. Now here you will find that the direction of the fibers changes. Now the direction of the fibers here, it is going to change. Now for that, you will let us see now the next diagram, and then we'll come back again. So here you will see that on the superolateral surface of the cerebral cortex, on the superolateral surface of the cerebral cortex, now this is now the, that is the precentral gyrus. So here you can see how the body is represented in this gyrus or in this primary motor cortex. So you'll find that the body is represented upside down. So the head and neck region, this is represented in the lower part of the primary motor cortex or the precentral gyrus. Now the trunk region, that upper limb, hand and the upper limb will be in the middle, and in the upper will be in the middle, and in the upper part you will find that mainly the trunk region and the lower limb. So lower limb, it will be also extending on the medial aspect of the cerebral hemisphere. So here the body is represented upside down. So toes, they will be lying at the top or on the medial aspect of the cerebral hemisphere, trunk and the hand region in the middle, and the head and the neck region will be below. So this type of, that is upside down arrangement of the body on this primary motor cortex, it is called as the motor homunculus. It is called as the motor homunculus. You can appreciate here. Now this is now the coronal section of the cerebral cortex. You can see here in the lower part now the head neck region, that is represented. In the middle portion you can see hand, representation of the hand, and then at the top and on the medial aspect you can see now the, that is the representation of the trunk region and the leg and the foot region. Clear? And now depending on how much precise that movement is going to be, how much precise that movement will be, there will be larger representation on the cerebral cortex or in this primary motor cortex. So more precise that area will be working, or more precise will be the movement, more will be the representation. So you'll find that face is having more representation. Again, hand in that thumb region is having more representation as compared to the as compared to the other fingers. Also, you'll find that face again in the lips are having more representation. Again, in the lips, lower lip is having more representation. So according to the preciseness of the movement which it will be producing, there will be the area on that primary motor cortex will be more area will be occupied on this primary motor cortex. So more precise the movement, more area will be occupied on this primary motor cortex. So again, come back to our previous diagram. Here you'll find that in the coronal section, the fibers which are arising from the face region, face and the head neck region, they are represented laterally and down. So they are represented here laterally or down, right? But when they will come, when they will descend down in the midbrain, now they will turn at right angles, and these laterally facing fibers, now they will move medially. So the fibers which are coming from the face region of the cerebral cortex, now they will be moving from lateral aspect, they will move medially and forward, while the fibers which were present on the top and medially, that is leg fibers, the fibers which are arising from the leg region, they are now projected laterally. Clear? So here you can see now the direction of the fibers is going to change. Now at this level also, few of the corticobulbar fibers will be ending on the motor nuclei of the third and the fourth cranial nerve. Then in the pons, they will be scattered by the pontine nuclei, and there will be formation of this longitudinal fasciculi. Again, corticobulbar fibers will be ending on this, that is 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th cranial nerve. Then further these fibers will descend in the medulla. In the upper part of the medulla, they form a bulge which is called as the pyramids. In the lower part, 80 to 85% fibers cross to the opposite side and form the lateral corticospinal tract, and the 15 to 20% fibers, they remain uncrossed, forming that anterior corticospinal tract. And again, you will find few of the fibers from the few of the corticobulbar fibers will be terminating on this, that is the last 4 cranial nerve nuclei, that is 9, 10, 11, 12. So body here it is represented upside down. So this now we have seen now in the internal capsule, corticospinal fibers, they appear or they occupy the anterior 2/3 of the posterior limb. And here the plane of the fiber rotates from coronal to right angle. So head fibers, they come anteriorly and medially, while the leg fibers, they will move posteriorly and lateral. Okay. So we have seen now in the midbrain, the corticospinal fibers, they occupy the middle part of the crus cerebri, while the medial 1/5 part of that crus cerebri, it carries frontopontine fibers, and the lateral 1/5 of the crus cerebri, it will form the temporopontine fibers. Okay. Now come to the pons. Now in the pons, we have seen the pyramidal fibers, they form the most, that is ventral part in the front of the trapezium. Here the tract is broken down or it is scattered by the the pontine nuclei and the crossing fibers of the middle cerebellar peduncle. Now in the medulla, again these scattered corticospinal fibers reunite and forms a bulge on the ventral aspect, that is pyramid. In the lower part of the medulla, 80 to 85% of the fibers, they are going to decussate, forming the lateral corticospinal fibers. Now in the spinal cord, you will find that this tract now extends throughout the cord, and at each spinal segment, some fibers will leave the tract, it will turn inwards, and it will end on the anterior horn cells or the motor neurons of the spinal cord, either directly or through the interneurons. They will end on that anterior horn cells. And accordingly now, alpha motor neurons or the anterior horn cells, they will excite the flexor motor neurons and inhibit the extensor motor neurons of the distal parts of the limb, that is the digits. So you'll find that you have studied now the plantar reflex before. So what will be the normal response for the plantar reflex? It is plantar flexion. So because this descending tract, that is the pyramidal tract, it brings about the or it excites the flexor group of muscles. So in the calf now it will bring about the excitation of the calf muscles. So because of that there will be plantar flexion response. So here in this now given diagram, you can see now the termination of these fibers of the descending tract. So you'll find that fibers, they are ending in each segment. They will turn here medially. You can see here they are turning medially, and 10% of the fibers, they end directly on the alpha motor neurons. 10% of the fibers, they are ending on the alpha motor neurons, which are supplying the flexor group of muscle. So, and you'll find again that major parts of the these fibers, they turn medially, and via interneurons again they will be ending on the alpha motor neurons, or they will be supplying or innervating the distal group of limb muscles. Clear? And again you'll find that you can see here the third branch which is coming. So fibers, these are arising from the which are arising from the somatosensory cortex. 40% fibers are coming from this sensory cortex. So they end on this dorsal horn cells. They are going to end on this dorsal horn cells. So you'll find that these interneurons, they will excite the agonist group of muscles, and at the same time they are going to inhibit the antagonist group of muscles, which we have studied in the synapse, right? And the fibers which are ending here on the dorsal horn, they provide the feedback signals to the incoming sensory information or incoming sensory signals, and this will bring about this will modify the sensory input, which will, when it will reach to the higher level, there will be modification in the sensory input. So what modification will be there in terms of that muscle tension, then degree of contraction of the muscle, force of the muscle. So that changes will be occurring at the higher level. But here you'll find that this modification of the sensory input, it occurs at the level of this dorsal horn. Clear? Now here you'll find that now you have seen that alpha motor neurons, now they will be sending the signals via the ventral root. Via the ventral root of the spinal nerve, these signals will pass to that specific group of muscles. Okay, so these alpha motor neurons, they are going to that specific group of skeletal muscles. So mainly they are sending signals to the extrafusal fibers, right? And these extrafusal fibers, they will now bring about the muscle contraction, and this muscle contraction of that group of muscle will produce the movement of that part. So whatever that we want, whatever that work which we have intended, that is to pick up the pen or to pick up that coffee cup, right? So that movement will be occurring now. And how it is occurring? By movement which will be occurring at the joint, that is flexion of the arm. Now you might have studied in the histology that inside this muscle belly, that is inside this extrafusal fibers, you'll find there are certain intrafusal fibers. So some of the descending tract fibers, they also reach here, or they are innervating the gamma motor fibers. Clear? And these gamma motor fibers will be supplying the intrafusal fibers which are present deep in the muscle belly, right? And these gamma motor neurons, they will be sending signals to these intrafusal fibers. Right? Now, what is the role of these intrafusal fibers? You know, these are the receptors, or these are the nothing but the muscle spindles. So they will pick up the signals regarding the stretching in the muscle. So they will detect the onset of the stretch. They will detect the progression of the stretch. Clear? And indirectly, you'll find that they help these extrafusal fibers. They will help these extrafusal fibers. How? By helping them to have that good contraction. So these intrafusal fibers become taut, and this helps to produce a good tone and a good contraction in the extrafusal fibers. So both these alpha and the gamma motor neurons in the anterior horn, they are working in coordination, and that's why we call this as the alpha gamma coactivation. Alpha gamma coactivation. Clear? So this is regarding now the termination of this descending, that is pyramidal tract. So you'll find that in all, the 55% of the fibers of this pyramidal tract, they will be terminating in the cervical region, 20% they will be terminating at the thoracic level of the spinal cord, and remaining 25 they will be terminating in the lumbosacral region. Clear? Now remaining is the direct or the ventral, or which is called as the uncrossed corticospinal fibers. Now they directly descend in the anterior white column, which is present in the spinal cord, which is present near the median fissure. So they are occupying the position in the anterior white column near the median fissure, and they continue as the anterior corticospinal tract. So what is the origin of these fibers, anterior corticospinal fibers? They are taking origin from the supplementary motor area, and they extend up to the mid-thoracic region only, and they will terminate on the interneurons of the same side or of the opposite side. So they will be supplying the postural group of muscles. So, and they will be producing the primitive movements, that is, they will be controlling the axial muscles, and these movements are bilateral. So they will control the axial muscles on both the sides. So whatever that for any fine movement, whatever stabilizing adjustments are to be done, so these are done by these postural muscles, and these are innervated by this anterior corticospinal tract. Clear? Now let us see what is the significance of this two tracts. So lateral and the anterior corticospinal tracts indicates that certain muscles in the body, they must have that bilateral control, that is from the both cerebral hemisphere. For example, the respiratory muscles. So they are bilaterally innervated, so that what we'll say, whenever there is damage on one side, the other side will help to continue the signals, and the respiratory muscles will continue to work. So that is the significance of this lateral and the anterior corticospinal tract. Okay. So next time we'll be studying the remaining part, that is functions of the corticospinal tract, what are the collaterals coming from the corticospinal tract. Okay, so that thing we'll be studying here, and also we'll study in detail regarding the functions and applied aspect of the descending tracts. Okay, that is mainly the pyramidal tract. So today we'll be stopping here, and next time we'll be continuing with the